We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us today for the Meet the Farm Hands video segment. I'm your host, Hannah Pagel, and today we are with Anne MacMillan with Invariant. Anne, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So to kick off the interview, let's just go back to the beginning, taking back to your California roots, and kind of just explain how you made your way out to DC.
Sure. So I'm from Sacramento, which is the bustling capital of California. And ever since I was a little kid, I was really interested in politics and the law and the study of law. I thought actually I was going to be a lawyer. Side note, I am a lawyer, but I'm not practicing a lawyer. And I just had this real interest in it, and all through high school and then in college. And in college, when everybody else was going to Paris or Italy for their summer or semester abroad, I came to Washington, D.C. And I did an internship at the Clinton White House. And I was placed in the social office. So I went to all these state dinners and had all these wonderful events. And my fake ID worked in DC. And I thought, this is the greatest city I have ever been to in my entire life. I must live here. And so as soon as I graduated, I packed up my bags and moved right out to Washington, DC. And I've been here ever since.
Okay, and then when you moved out here, what was your first job?
Sure. So so it was interesting. I moved out here in 2000. We're after the 2000 election. So Democrats had lost. That was the Gore-Bush. We lost the White House and did not have the House and Senate. But I just moved out here assuming I would get a job, no problem. And I was just pretty lucky that my hometown congressman from Sacramento was looking for a staff assistant. So I did that job. I answered the phones. I gave the tours. I folded the flags. I clipped newspapers. And started out really literally at the bottom rung.
Mm-hmm. So from that position, did you always know you wanted to get into agriculture policy, or how did you kind of make your way into that
Sure.
area?
Yeah, so sort of stepping back even further. So my grandparents are from Iowa. My mom grew up in a little tiny town in Iowa, West Point, population like 500. And I have these beautiful memories of going to Iowa over the summers when I was a kid. I could walk everywhere. Everybody knew my name, and then I didn't know them. It was announced in the paper that my mom and I were coming. I just sort of distinctly remember how beautiful like the summers were with the cornfields and the sun and the silos, and I just have these beautiful memories. So I already had sort of a passion for agriculture. I just didn't really know it. And then when I first started out in that office as a staff assistant, the lowest issue was I think I handled postal reform and agriculture. And in Sacramento, while the city of Sacramento doesn't have any agriculture, it's surrounded by a lot of rice. And so I got to know some folks in the rice community very early on, and I just really, like, my appreciation for agriculture from my Iowa roots sort of transferred over to California, and I just thought it was a really neat, like, community of people. And then when my next job, I left for a little bit to go back to California to work on a campaign, and that member of Congress won, and he represented the Central Valley of California. So for months when I was working on the campaign, all I did was meet with farmers and go to farmering events and meet with the Farm Bureau. And it was just, sort of ag and water all day long, 24/7. And it just solidified that this is what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, how did you make your way to the Speaker of the House office and working for Pelosi?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just so funny, like for me, and I don't, it's not always like this, but every sort of job, like I fell into the next one. So when I was working for Dennis Cardozo, the member who was from the Central Valley, we did the 2008 Farm Bill, and it was a tough one. And we fought like tooth and nail to get specialty crops and some California items into the Farm Bill. And the Speaker, Pelosi, was Speaker at that time. So my boss and I worked very closely with her and her policy advisor for agriculture And then right after the Farm Bill, that person left, and she called me and she said, I'm making recommendations to replace me, and I want to put you on the short list. And I said, like, of course. Like, I mean, sort of when you're in the House of Representatives, your dream is to work for the Speaker. And I got the job. And so it was really, I really think I got the job because my boss and I did such a good job in the Farm Bill. And so without that, I wouldn't have been able to make the leap.
Mm-hmm. So you worked for 2 members of Congress in their personal office and then the Speaker. Mm-hmm. So working on policy issues for the Speaker of the House versus, the personal offices or a committee, is there much difference in terms of like power and like the issues that you are working on, or do you feel like you have, I guess, more control or just more power in the issues that you're working on?
So it's like different power, right? So I mean, I still think the most important work I've done, in my career is working on that 2008 Farm Bill with Dennis Cardoza together and with a bunch of other, Debbie Stabenow was part of that, or Chairwoman Stabenow. And, we were in the weeds and we were in the minutia, and we were negotiating. It was awesome, right? Which is very different when you get to the leadership level because somebody else is working out those details. And it's sort of, you are more of a traffic cop, like, yes, these things should come to the floor, no, these things should not come to the floor, or they need more work, or we don't have enough votes, or it's a much different mix of policy and politics. And I equally loved it, but it was a different type of work, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, I think, and that's also sort of what I had at USDA, but I think that work kind of suits me better, which is like, I'm an inch thick, mile wide kind of person. I can handle a lot of issues. I can multitask, and I like being able to make a gut decision about what's the right choice and not necessarily have to know every tiny little detail. Mm-hmm. So it was a good fit for me.
Okay. And you brought up USDA.
Yes.
So what made you want to leave the Hill and go work for Vilsack?
Right. So I worked for the Speaker for a couple years, and then it was 2010. And for those of us listening who are not old enough to remember, that was like the summer of the Tea Partiers. And part of my job in the Speaker's office was the Blue Dog liaison. And there were 54 of them at that point. And they were just, beside themselves that summer. This is not good. This is like, things are not good at home. These Tea Partiers are real. And I sort of started thinking, ooh, this election might not turn out so well. And, people had been asking me or talking to me about going into the administration since Obama came in, but I wasn't really interested because I had this great job with the Speaker's office. So it just, again, I fell into it again. So Karen Ross, who I'd worked with all my life in California, had just come over to be Vilsack's chief of staff. Somebody was leaving in the secretary's office. I said, I think I had told her a couple months before, hey, if there's an opening, I'm interested. And sure enough, there was an opening. I was interested. I went and interviewed, and I was able to make that leap again. Mm-hmm.
Now, in a previous conversation you and I had, you brought up that in your interview with Vilsack, you said something that you think kind of like got you the job. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of, explain that story?
Yeah, I didn't know a ton about Vilsack, other than his reputation, which was that he was very firm and tough, but smart. And I told him that. And I said, but, I have met your wife before. Because one of the summers I was in Iowa, she was the first lady, and part of her tour was visiting libraries. And she came to my grandmother's town's tiny little library. And I just remember seeing, sort of the spectacle and how smart politically it was. And I kind of told that story more to fill up air time. And little did I know, they have an incredibly wonderful relationship, Secretary Vilsack and his wife. And I think that he was really proud that I had said that of her. And I think it certainly helped me maybe over the edge. Hopefully I got the job on my merits, but my storytelling and my connection to Mrs. Vilsack, I think was probably a little helpful as well.
A nice little touch.
A nice little touch.
So out of all the issues that you worked on at USDA, and even on the Hill, was there one that you just loved working on the most?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I will say on the Hill, I mean, so I'm especially, like, I'm from California. I have never understood commodity programs. I will never understand commodity programs, and I'm fine with that, because there's plenty of other smart people who do. What I do understand is like the special place that sort of non-commodity crop states like California and Florida and Georgia and other places play in our like U.S. agriculture system. And so to me, again, I'll sort of keep going back to like the '08 Farm Bill, where my boss and I just clawed our way into that Farm Bill and have a specialty crop title and really pushed. And I learned a lot from that lesson of how to negotiate and get what you want. And so I definitely enjoyed doing that at USDA as well. Every time the secretary would go to California, I would go with him. It was great to be able to go home a lot and sort of, show everybody that there was a Californian who in the secretary's office who really cared about them, in addition to Secretary Vilsack, who actually does care a lot about specialty crops. But then some of the other things that I had not worked on before until I got to USDA, like food safety issues were just always a problem and always a crisis. But like a good crisis. Like there was real meaty work. Sorry, pun intended. There was real work to be done, and it was really fulfilling work. And so I really enjoyed that portfolio as well. Mm-hmm.
Kind of going back to that Farm Bill, you mentioned the negotiations aspect, mm-hmm. and you learning a lot with that. Can you kind of maybe talk through what some of those negotiations were like and how it's helped you move on in the rest of your career?
Sure. I'll give you an example. So we had a coalition of specialty crop folks, and on the Hill, a bunch of members that represented specialty crops, and the chairman at the time like tried to pick them off, and we worked really hard to keep everybody together because we knew that we had to be a block. We had to be a voting block. We had to stay linked arms, and there couldn't be a chink in the armor. And it was interesting, like how aggressive that tactic was pushed, right? There were a lot of times where people were dangling a lot of money and a lot of district help in front of various assorted members in our army, and we stayed firm. And I think that has been a really important lesson, to like not back down and to make reasonable requests, but like make sure that you don't have a weak link in your armor.
So you've been in ag policy for almost 20 years now. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of explain how it has changed over these past 20 years? I mean, from when you first started to even now, like what changes are kind of like the most prevalent?
Sure. I'll take them in, I think, two kind of like buckets of changes. One is just, I'd say the face of agriculture. Like, I mean, when I first started 20 years ago, there was very few women, very few people of color. And I think it's been really interesting and impressive to see, 20 years later, like all of these women CEOs. I think of like Beth Ford and Kristen Peckett-Zoetis and then all of these people at USDA. I mean, Dr. Bernat is like so amazing. And I'm just so proud that this department is being populated with so many women and people of color, and throughout the lobbying world too. I mean, there's a lot of us women, and I think it's great. And I feel like I don't have to, if I go to an ag event, I'm not going to be the only woman sitting there by myself in the corner. It's no longer an old boys club. So I like that. And I think the other thing on the policy side, I have just been like amazed at the change in the discussion on climate. When I first started, 20 years ago, it was like we were just such in a defensive mode. Like everybody was coming after ag. In California, ag was a polluter with respect to air pollution and water issues, and like everybody hated us. And now, like fast forward 20 years, everyone's like, wow, well, agriculture is the solution, and we need to have them. There all this carbon bank and all of this stuff. And I mean, it's like shocking to me, the 180 on how people, like just sort of your average like American citizen views agriculture with respect to climate change. Mm-hmm. So I think both things are great. And I'm kind of interested to see like where both of those buckets go in the next 20 years.
For sure. I always like asking this question, but like, what's like a piece of advice that you have been given in your career that has stuck with you and will continue to stick with you throughout the rest of your endeavors?
Yeah. So one of the things I tell people a lot, and I was told this once, is, especially in Washington, you never know where people are going to end up. And so best to err on the side of kindness and inclusiveness and, trying to be a better person. And I think, and I remember to this day, like when I was a staff assistant for a congressman from Sacramento who had nothing to do with agriculture, Farmers Rice Cooperative, which is outside of Sacramento, the guy that ran it, he would come lobby me. I was 21 years old. I was working at the front desk. He clearly knew I was a staff assistant, and he could not have been nicer to me. He took me out to the facility. He would show me around. And, I still to this day remember how respectful he was to me, even though he could have easily not been, right? Well, 10 years later, I'm the deputy chief of staff at USDA, and he still would come to visit me, and we would still have a wonderful time, and I would do anything. He's since deceased, but I would have done anything for Bill Huffman, And I think to me, that's like one of the pieces of, and vice versa. Like I never knew who was going to walk in the door and have a meeting and ask for a meeting with me. And I tried my best, didn't always succeed, but tried my best to be, as kind and respectful to every person I would interact with in my job at both on the Hill and at USDA, because you honestly don't know where people are ever going to end up. And it's best to just err on the side of respect. Mm-hmm.
So we've talked a lot about your career. Let's kind of transition the conversation a little bit, and let's get to know Anne on a personal level.
Okay.
So maybe let's just start off by tell me a little bit about your family.
Sure. So I have a blended family. This is my second marriage. But my husband, Tim, is a lawyer, and I have two older stepkids. I have a 20-year-old who's in college, and a 17-year-old who's going to be a senior in high school. And then I have a 9-year-old, and we have a 3-year-old.
Okay.
So we have everything on the entire gamut of children. So
I can only imagine family vacations are
it's a lot. It's a lot. The family is a lot. But it's okay. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't really have it any other way. And our littlest one was a surprise, and it's been great. Being at home with them all for the last year and a half is a lot, but I don't know. I think I will look back fondly on this time at home with them.
Mm-hmm. So when you're not lobbying and working on egg policy, what can we find you doing in your spare time?
Peloton. I'm just kidding. Not kidding. I do a lot of Peloton. My family, we're big skiers. So we actually, this year, thank you, COVID, we moved to Park City for the month of February, and we lived out there. We're actually going again to live out there in the month of August. So I love the outdoors. I like to ski, and in the summer I like to hike. And then I actually also read a lot. To the extent I can stay awake at night, I like to read, kind of trashy novels.
Okay.
I'm in 2 book clubs. I'm quite proud of that.
What books can we find you reading right now?
So I just finished The Guest List by Lucy Foley, kind of a beach read. I'm going to go back and forth between, I've got 2 book clubs, and one of them is much more of a beach read book club, and then one of them is a little bit more serious, so I have to it's a little bit more hefty books. Mm-hmm. We just finished The Northern Spy for that one.
Okay.
I'm happy to make a book recommendation to your audience if they're interested, but that's all I really have time for, to be quite honest.
Mm-hmm. So who would you say has been a mentor to you throughout mm-hmm. your career? In DC, it could be more than one mentor or...
Yeah, I'd say... probably my more formative years. Karen Ross, I think, is one of them. I just knew her forever. And to talk about somebody who, I don't know if you know her, just a nice human being, but one who wields an incredible amount of power. And I'm always grateful for her to helping me get into USDA. And she's just a really kind, wonderful human. And then, I wouldn't say they're my mentors, but I have a little group of girlfriends who are also in this space. You've interviewed several of them, and I think it's really nice to have my best friends be people who are in ag, in lobbying in ag, on the Hill and doing ag, and we don't talk shop that often, but if we do, it's a nice group to crowdsource information or gut check stuff with. So. Mm-hmm. They're my kitchen cabinet mentors.
Yeah. So for young women in this industry, what advice do you have for them if they are looking at coming out to DC and getting into ag policy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that a lot, and I don't know if there's like a silver bullet. And I think the question of finding a mentor and who is it and how dedicated do you have to be to finding a mentor? I mean, I think a lot of that, I err a little bit on the more side of organicness, finding people that you connect with and really engaging with them and learning from how they've become successful. Because not every path makes sense for everybody. Like, to be a lobbyist, to be a multi-client lobbyist, you have to have a certain expertise and network and a personality and stamina, and that's not for everybody, right? But sometimes people really want to get into the minutia, and they should be looking at a path that maybe takes them to a trade association or a company that you can really sink your teeth into, or long-term government service. And so I think sometimes it's not necessary to model your every step after somebody else's, but kind of take best practices from a lot of different people and make them your own.
Mm-hmm. So before we wrap up the interview, we always like to end the segment on this question. But if you could go back to day one, whether that be in your internship with the White House or on Capitol Hill, what advice would you tell yourself with everything that you have learned and know now? What advice would you tell yourself then?
I mean, I guess if I knew I was going to be doing, while I always loved ag, I don't know if I would have day one of Capitol Hill said, I'm going to be an ag policy person for the rest of my life. But I think if I knew that I was going to be, I think I would have told myself back then to pay a little bit more attention to some of the early years when, I don't know, I think I was kind of goofing off sometimes in my early years, and when I probably should have been paying a little bit more attention to the kind of the ins and outs of some of the policy stuff in this particular area. Because I think I was still finding my way in those first early years, but it all was pointing towards agriculture since I was a kid. And I guess I just didn't really realize it until later on in life.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. This has been really fun. I appreciate the time, and I'm honored to be asked.